Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be discussing the topic of when cosmetics in games go too far. Now for this video I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to start with a thesis statement and then basically use the entire video to support that statement. In the game of War Thunder, if you were to download and install the game fresh and boot it up, by default the setting for cosmetics would be set to anything except fictional. This setting means that many of the most outlandish skins in War Thunder are not going to be displayed to an average player unless they choose to have them displayed. In my personal and humble opinion, I find this setting does a lot more heavy lifting than most players realize to prevent cosmetics from getting too out of hand in the game, especially for people that wouldn't exactly enjoy them. The alternative setting of any will of course allow all cosmetics to be displayed. Now, as a minor preface, this is a topic that I have been looking at for a little while. However, the recent release of the Senrai Maidens pack has given it a little bit more fuel to the fire to have this discussion. And later on in the video, I will go a bit more in depth into my thoughts on the Senrai Maidens packs in particular and how I think they generally stack up. However, one of the general complaints that will often be leveled against you if you come out discussing these out of place cosmetics is that you're just an old man shaking your stick at the sky and you just don't like change. While I'm sure my regular viewers will be well aware that I do use quite a few outlandish skins in my game, for anybody that is new to the channel, I decided to pick up one of the packs and let my viewers vote on which pack I would be picking. The voters overwhelmingly chose the Elsa tank. Or no, not that Elsa, although to be fair, if Gaijin did manage to land a Disney princess collaboration, I would be truly impressed. So while we are just having a discussion about out of place cosmetics, feel free to enjoy the Elsa tank gameplay in the background. There is an increasingly common term in the gaming landscape called the Fortniteification of all things. If you've been living under a rock and aren't that familiar with it, Fortnite is a large free-to-play battle royale game that is very popular with younger audiences and just collaborates with any and everyone that will have them. They have everyone from Goku and Master Chief to K-pop demon hunters and Star Wars. Now, it's important to note that for Fortnite, these collaborations tend to work better than they do with some other games because Fortnite doesn't have a lot of established canon and doesn't have any kind of historical background. On top of that, when Fortnite does integrate all these various collaborations, it tends to also copy them in Fortnite's trademark art style. So while part of the reason Fortnite gets away with all these collaborations, none of which are seemingly all that connected to each other, is because it was the first game to do it, another part of it is that there wasn't really any firm foundation to be ruined or undermined in the process. With that being said, a lot of other games have seen the large amounts of cash that Fortnite is able to rake in with all of these collaborations and have decided to get a bit of a piece of the pie, and it hasn't always worked out as well for every other game as it has for Fortnite. Now, just to establish this right away, a common trend that we're going to see with a lot of these collaborations or out-of-place cosmetics is that there are two major factors that contribute to how much or how little the community like them. The first major factor is exactly how out of place are the cosmetics. Do they at least somewhat make an attempt to fit in with the established game's canon, the real world, etc., or are they completely off the wall? The second major factor is how often do these collaborations occur. Are they happening all the time, or is it once a year or even once every 2 years? Both of these factors have a significant impact in how well or poorly a lot of these collaborations or out-of-place cosmetics are perceived by the player base. And we're going to start off with one of probably the least contentious of the collaborations or out-of-place cosmetics that we're going to be talking about, and that is the Helldivers x Halo collaboration that happened when the Helldivers first launched for Xbox. In this collaboration, it's not like Master Chief is storming around your lobbies, it's just some Halo-themed cosmetics and weapons, but all of this still very much fits within the confines of the Helldivers 2 universe. On top of that, actual collaborations with Helldivers 2 are pretty infrequent, and most of the time they are simply one-off references to other properties that are simply integrated into the normal game that aren't really that intrusive. So on the whole, pretty much everything Helldivers 2 have done with other properties or that have been referencing other properties have been pretty well received by the community, or at very least haven't been received with any real hostility. The next and more contentious example is the Universes Beyond system with Magic Magic the Gathering. Universes Beyond is where Magic the Gathering collaborates with another setting and basically creates an entire expansion within that setting. Now, originally Universes Beyond was simply commander decks, so they didn't actually participate in the normal standard gameplay. They were very much in their own basically side event. However, as time has gone on, more and more Universes Beyond sets are standard legal, and the very first one that did this was Lord of the Rings, and at the time it was at least reasonably well received because Lord of the Rings and Magic are at least adjacent enough in terms of high fantasy that it's not that big of a deal. However, once you start dipping into a lot of the other IPs like Avatar, Final Fantasy, or in the most recent case Spider-Man, the crossovers are increasingly absurd and have little to no connectivity to the main Magic storyline or even to each other. Indeed, Magic has actually developed a fairly robust amount of lore over the past few decades with planewalkers and various epic villains like the Phyrexians or the Eldrazi, so having entire universes that have basically nothing to do with all of the established canon feels very weird and out of place for Magic, and the Spider-Man set did noticeably underperform, although in no small part that was due to the fact that it wasn't originally intended to be a full expansion in its own right. However, there is an interesting side note in that Wizards of the Coast didn't actually secure the rights for the digital cards, only the physical cards, so for Magic the Gathering Online, if any of these cards are released, they're basically going to get entirely new names and artwork, which does highlight the fact that a lot of these cosmetics are not mechanical. They don't directly affect how you play the game, they simply affect the vibes of the game, but in some instances that is enough to turn players off the game itself. The next big example is Call of Duty, and we're not going to look at the handful of Call of Duty skins that seem to have accidentally also had a mechanical impact. Originally this was the Rose skin, and the OG Warzone players watching this will remember that this skin was basically impossible to see in dark corners, but they've also had some more recent collabs like the Groot skin or even the Terminator skin that were equally difficult to see, but those appear to be unintentional and the designers did add some extra bits to kind of make them more visible. What we're actually looking at is simply the cosmetic skins that don't have any direct gameplay impact. And this is where we see the very direct route from the skins being okay or the community just kind of accepting them even though they are a little weird, all the way into the community going into full-on revolt. Originally you had some one-offs like the Godzilla vs. Kong skin or the Attack on Titan skins that were a little weird but not too bad, but eventually you start getting all the way into skins like Beavis and Butthead and American Dad that are completely different art styles from the entire game of Call of Duty. In this instance, the problem is not just that these skins look really out of place, the problem is also that the skins are very relentless. There are crossovers happening basically all the time, and it makes the game look increasingly more ridiculous, even though, as I said with the Magic the Gathering Spider-Man set, they are mechanically still identical. They have exactly the same hitbox, they have exactly the same animations, at least in terms of how it affects the character model, etc., all the guns work the same, but it makes the game feel completely different. Now, while referring to Call of Duty as a grounded military shooter definitely seems like a stretch at this point, it was a lot more grounded going back into the Modern Warfare 1 and 2 and Black Ops 1 days, at least compared to some of the early FPSs like Quake, Doom, Wolfenstein, etc. It should also be mentioned that there also is an established canon and characters and universe for the various Call of Duty titles and franchises, so it's not completely without its own context, so having Godzilla or King Kong or Beavis and Butthead beating up Captain Price just seems very out of place for the franchise. This is also where we do kind of segue a bit into Battlefield 6, because when Battlefield 6's open beta launched, all of the skins were very grounded and very realistic, and this contrasted very sharply with Call of Duty, especially because Black Ops 7 was about to have carry forward, which meant that all of your cosmetics from Black Ops 6, including Beavis and Butthead, were going to carry over into Black Ops 7. This caused a huge revolt in the Call of Duty community because seeing the comparatively grounded game of Battlefield 6 and what they could have, and then seeing the ridiculous nonsense they did have, the Call of Duty community was very upset over carry forward, and ultimately this was removed. Beavis and Butthead will not be carrying over into Black Ops 7 because of community revolt. With that being said, however, when Battlefield 6 announced its Season 1 along with a selection of these skins that were data mined, the Battlefield 6 community had its own mini revolt, and if you look at this selection of skins, they're still military type individuals wearing tactical gear. Some of the colors just looked a little weird and out of place. However, this was enough that a lot of Battlefield players have been very vocal at complaining about these skins. And this wraps around to a core point in that ultimately, what skins a community will or will not put up with is determined entirely by the community. It is not determined by the developers, no matter how much a lot of developers would like to try otherwise. While the Call of Duty community didn't completely lose it until Beavis and Butthead entered their game, the Battlefield 6 players are having a real one because one of their guys has orange magazine pouches. It just goes to show there is a heavy aspect of community feedback in terms of what your community is willing to tolerate, and developers should be willing to respond to that. Finishing this section up, we will go a little bit closer to War Thunder and the World of Tanks game, in which they had multiple collaborations with Girls und Panzer. Girls und Panzer is actually a pretty popular anime series within the tank community, and actually does have quite a bit of attention to historical accuracy in terms of the tanks themselves, even if a lot of the concepts are pretty ridiculous. However, obviously having anime schoolgirls in your tank game does feel a little out of place, but ultimately isn't something the community isn't willing to put up with. But that's not the only collaboration World of Tanks has had. They've had collaborations like Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, Terminator, and even Snatch. Granted, Snatch is a pretty good movie, but I'm not sure how that has any connection whatsoever, either to World of Tanks or any of the other collaborations they've done. While World of Tanks, at least in the early days, prided itself a bit on historical accuracy, it does seem a little outlandish to get these increasingly out-of-place cosmetics and collaborations added to the game. However, the community hasn't really hinted at a full-scale revolt over them up to this point. So again, it just really highlights that being able to read the room as a developer in terms of what your players are willing to put up with is a very important aspect of implementing things like cosmetics into your game. And ultimately, this is something that players of all games need to realize, is that you will ultimately get whatever game your community is willing to put up with. We can talk about developers listening or not listening all day, but if they lose a sizable chunk of their players, they will absolutely respond. I believe Black Ops 7 is probably one of the biggest examples, because Black Ops 7's pre-orders were lagging well behind Battlefield 6, and they saw Battlefield 6 as a serious threat. So a lot of major and substantive changes both to the visuals and gameplay were made in a direct response to the players not pre-ordering that game. So always remember, if you see a game with some really broken mechanics, whether it be gameplay or progression or some really dumb cosmetics that are super out of place, ultimately the community gets the game they're willing to put up with. If the community keeps spending time and money on the game, there's no incentive for the developers to change. So wrapping back around to the Senrai Maidens and the accept fictional setting, in my humble opinion, because this setting is enabled by default when you first start up the game, the player's first experience with War Thunder is that it is going to be a fairly grounded tank game, and if they want it to be something else, they can have it be something else. However, the reason why you wouldn't want this as a toggleable option the other way around, as in everything is enabled by default and you have to disable them, which is what people have recommended for games like Battlefield 6, Call of Duty, etc., is because the first impression is obviously the most important. If somebody is expecting a reasonably grounded tank game and they are greeted to anime girl faces right off the bat, they're more likely to be turned off well before they even find that setting to disable those anime tank girls. But the opposite is not actually true. Somebody who really likes the gameplay and really likes the tank but wants the anime tank girls is going to find a way to get them in your game regardless, and if all they have to do is flip a setting and go onto the store to find the cosmetics they want, then all the better. In my humble opinion, whether it was Gaijin's intention or not, whether they stumbled into this or actually planned it, they created a scenario wherein people that want a historical tank game can have it, but people who want Gooner bait skins left and right can also have it. Overall, I think having this setting enabled by default does a lot of heavy lifting that allows War Thunder to perform in a way that World of Tanks just kind of doesn't. As far as the Senrai Maidens pack specifically, I do want to be at least somewhat fair to Gaijin Entertainment. I know it's not exactly popular, you're supposed to hate the company, yada yada. But if you compare the Kate, Elsa, and Maria packs with basically the identical premium packs that don't have all of the anime Gooner bait, the M1A1HC, the Leopard 2A4M, and the T80UE1, the packs are the exact same price, and mechanically are effectively the same vehicles. Well, not really. There are some small details that I'll get into in a second. Obviously the Gooner bait spins do have some extra cosmetics like an anime girl PFP, etc., but on the whole, mechanically these packs will perform basically identically, so if you don't like having the anime Gooner bait skins, you can simply buy the other pack. It's the exact same price and contains exactly the same vehicle. On top of that, even if you do pick up the Senrai Maidens tanks, you have full access to a normal suite of skins in addition to the Senrai Maiden skins, so you can simply make them look a lot more like a normal tank. Indeed, if you have your UI set to not display fictional stuff, you will actually just see the standard skin when you look at these tanks. You will not see the anime skins. Now, in terms of the skins themselves, the only real difference you'll notice between Kate and a normal M1A1 HC clickbait is that she has different stuff in the bustle rack of her tank. These are things like a baseball glove and baseball bat, etc, etc. It's not really that big of a difference, and honestly, if you don't equip the anime skin, it looks kind of normal and not really that far out for a tank. Additionally, it also has the least functional differences, so it is effectively just identical to the clickbait, but with some extra cosmetics. The other two do have some minor differences, which is a little weird. For the Maria, if you compare it side by side with the T80 UE1, obviously you do have some extra cosmetics like the teddy bear sitting on top of the barrel, but there is also a minor functional difference in that the T80 UE1 has a camo net and Maria doesn't. So I guess technically Maria is slightly worse than the T80 UE1 if you think the camo net is a relevant part of gameplay. Most of the time it isn't. At this battle rating, most people are using thermals, but if you do think the camo net is relevant, then the Maria skin is technically worse because even the normal skins don't have access to the camo net. Elsa is actually where it starts to get a little weird though, because Elsa is in the Leopard 2A4M, which is a Canadian tank. Now Elsa's tank also doesn't have access to the camo net, so yet again, if you think that's a relevant card of gameplay, then it is technically slightly worse than the 2A4M in that area, even if you were to equip a regular skin. However, there are a few other oddities with Elsa, because the 2A4M Canadian, because it's a Canadian tank, the crew speaks English, whereas Elsa speaks German. Additionally, the 2A4M has access to Canadian camos, whereas Elsa has access to German camos. So Elsa actually has access to different camos and different voice lines than the 2A4M, which makes it probably the most different out of the group. Even then, it still is functionally the same in terms of raw stats. The weight, the power to weight, the shell, etc. are all basically identical, but there are a lot more cosmetic differences between Elsa and the Canadian Leopard 2A4M than on the other packs. This also brings up an interesting side note because some people have asked whether the Senrai Maidens are a collaboration. The Senrai Maidens and all of the copyrights for them are actually owned by Gaijin, but they're not specifically attached to War Thunder, so whether or not this is going to be an ongoing thing for War Thunder or they intend to do things with other medium is very unclear right now. Obviously, even though I'm a CC, they don't tell me anything, so I have no idea what, if anything, they're planning to do with this. Maybe they're planning to make their own game, maybe this is a collaboration, or maybe this is just part of War Thunder going forward, who knows. Now, to give some closing thoughts, there are ultimately multiple ways that a game can monetize itself. One of them is pay to win, which a lot of players generally don't like because you just throw money at the screen and you get an obvious advantage. Another one is pay to progress, which often ends up rather poorly long term because in a pay to progress game, the developers are incentivized to make the progression so slow that players are essentially forced to pay for it. However, another way is pay to look cool, and pay to look cool doesn't present a direct mechanical benefit to any player, it just makes things look a little weird. And in my opinion, pay to look cool, if implemented successfully, can be one of the strongest ways to monetize, simply because it has the least mechanical impact on the game. However, as we've seen with games like Call of Duty, paying to look cool, especially if you're including things that are so ridiculously out of place that they feel like they belong in a completely different game and you're doing it all the time, can actually have some pretty negative side effects for your game and the player base as a whole. In their current form, I don't feel the Senrai Maidens packs are inherently hurting anyone. If you don't want to engage with them, you don't have to. There's even a setting where you can basically turn these skins off and just see them as normal tanks. There isn't really anything forcing you to actually see these vehicles in their anime states, so it's not too bad. Additionally, a lot of the skins aren't really that outlandish. The Elsa tank in particular is just solid black with the colors of the German flags basically as racing stripes, so it's not really that bad cosmetically. You could easily confuse this for just a normal parade skin that a country would use for a celebration of some sort. So on the whole, I feel like the skins are fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with them being in the game. However, I do feel like if these skins really started to take over and the game also had the default set to any cosmetic, it might start to negatively impact how many people choose to stick with the game when they start seeing anime girl skins everywhere. Like I said very early on, the two factors that need to be considered when you're adding these kind of cosmetics to the game is how outlandish are they, do they match the established art style, and also how frequent are they. And at this point it still remains to be seen how much Gaijin really intends to go in this direction, so we'll just have to wait and see on that front. But those are just my thoughts on the matter. Let me know what you think of the Senrai Maidens packs in War Thunder, and also of outlandish collaborations and cosmetics in general in the comments down below. I always love to hear from you guys. If you like the video, like and subscribe, always helps out the channel. As always, danke bitte tschüss.